Welcome to my podcast. My name is Alex Dove, and I'm an author. The goal of my podcast is to bring you along on my journey and share with you my experiences on writing. It is a peek behind the curtain, if you will, on the occasional struggles and more often the incredible joys of writing. During this time, I'll walk you through my writing practices and share behind-the-scenes secrets. This will allow you the opportunity to understand the style behind my writing and to know a little bit more about the person behind the books. When I sit down to write a new story, there's some preparation required. For starters, several questions come to mind. What do I write? When do I write it? What do I use to write? Additionally, none of these three questions take into account any research that has to be done in order to make that writing happen. But research is a topic for a different podcast. Today, however, I'm focused on what I do as an author to start my journey on a new novel. To begin with, I'll talk about timing. Then move on to what I use to craft my stories, and finally finish with the process of writing itself. So, where do we start? Let's address the elephant in the room. Time. It is always so limited, and it has a sneaky way to slip away before I know it's gone. The big question is, when do I find time to write? How do I carve out a block of time where I can think creatively? This can be challenging, especially when juggling other responsibilities. But here is how I work out that piece of this jigsaw puzzle. Because I have a family, and that comes with certain responsibilities. But one of those responsibilities is to myself. I dedicate time to write, and I make it known to everyone in my family so they understand my writing schedule. I write in the morning, I write at lunch, and I write before bed. I also write on the weekends. I set aside more time, when feasible, before life complicates things and steals that time away. I try on average to write 1,500 good words a day. To begin with, I use my phone to hold ideas, notes, and story pieces as I'm trying to make the initial sense of the overall story. Later, I use a journal, but eventually return back to the phone. Since I use the phone to craft the beginning elements of my story, I can literally write anywhere. I don't need to worry at this point about carrying around my pen and journal. Whether I'm at the library, at the line in grocery store, or have any downtime at home, I can always jot down a quick note on my phone. How exactly do I use my phone? How do I stay organized? Well, I use a paid-for app called Scrivener. I use it both on my phone and on my MacBook Pro. I craft the general outline of my story there on my phone before using my journal. Because I take my phone everywhere with me, it's the perfect tool to carve out large chunks for a story. I use it to hash out bigger picture ideas, concepts that I need to explore further, questions and bedside ideas that come in the middle of the night. I take everything I've written on my phone, which at this point is usually chicken scratch and random concepts, and rewrite them into lengthy scenes in my journal. I have a new journal for each book I write. So, not only do I have a writing journal, but I also have a favorite pen. It's a special pen that I reserve for writing my books. It might sound silly, but it's a piece of the overall magic that I use to get my creative juices flowing. I use my journal to write out what-if scenarios as I move through the major plot points in the story, which were outlined on my phone. This journal becomes the backbone to my stories, and holds many of the major, albeit not final elements, for the story I'm crafting. But it doesn't stay there. I then dictate my semi-completed story from my journal back into my phone using speech-to-text translation. Once the dictation is done, I go back and clean it up. I don't polish it at this point. Editing is for a later step. I simply correct obvious errors. Polishing is done once I copy the drafted chapters into Scrivener on my MacBook Pro. This brings me to the third tool I use, which is my computer. I import the story from Scrivener on my phone into Scrivener on my laptop. This is when the first major round of editing takes place. I understand that final editing is performed in Microsoft Word. My editing process is detailed in a separate podcast. Every writer has their own set of instruments in their toolbox, their own way of doing things. Don't take my methodology as gospel. Just know that it is what works for me. That was the overall picture of how my writing process works. So when I sit down to write a new piece, what exactly am I doing? I have my tools ready and the page is blank, right? Initially, yes. But remember, I don't start trying to write my story from the beginning. Usually, my story starts somewhere in the middle and the ends are created organically. I rarely stare at a blank page wondering what to write. Remember, when I said that I take notes and write ideas on my phone before I write in my journal? It is there that these raw nuggets of story elements take form, and I polish them into a novel which I hope will resonate with my readers. I start with writing down the basic premise of the book. Is it a mystery? Is it a suspense novel? Is it going to be a fantasy piece? What is the idea for the book, the general plot concept? I notate any plot ideas, characters, motive, and anything else that comes to mind, regardless of where exactly in the storyline it takes place. I just make sure that I have it written down. Then I build all those ideas by adding them in piece by piece. It doesn't look pretty at first. It's not supposed to. The point of this exercise is to get the information on the page. It ends up being random fragments of story scattered on the page which fit somewhere between the beginning and the end. But these are the nuggets I start with that eventually get polished into gold. Once I have the basic idea carved in my head for the story, I like to get a picture of who I'm working with. Who are the actors that will be playing center stage in my story? Who is the protagonist? Who, if any, is the antagonist? Crafting characters is a separate podcast, but it's important at this point for me to understand who I'm working with. Who is going to be taking up space in my head? I want to know a name, a shape, a person with deep emotions, or maybe it's a person who lacks the ability to connect with others. It is here where those characters begin to take form. The next question is, how do I create a character? Sometimes it takes time to come up with a person and the right name and the right physique to match the character I have in my mind. To start with, I have a list of hundreds of names from a variety of demographics and nationalities. The names are separated into both male and female groups. I also have a long list of surnames. I work through this list, mixing and matching all of the options in my head until I craft a strong name for each major and minor character. People often ask me, how do I come up with the ideas for my stories? Well, that's an easy question and a hard question to answer. The simplest response is that I get my ideas from life. I pull ideas from what is happening around me, whether I'm driving down the interstate and see something, or I'm at my children's sporting events and talking with other parents. I pull ideas for stories organically from my surroundings. Or maybe I pull a memory from my childhood. I think to myself, would that situation make for a good story? So, in today's session, I've covered several topics related to the beginning phases of my writing process. I've covered the tools I use to write and my writing strategy. I also discussed how I manage my time in order to craft compelling stories with unique characters. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Join me soon for another podcast or check out my blog for additional topics. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter where members are presented with new information or special offers. Check back soon for more content. Thank you for joining me on my podcast. Come back and join me again as I share my writing journey. This is Alex Dove, and until next time, may your pen never run dry, your muse never wander, and your tales never lose their magic.